Mr. President.
Senator from Kentucky.
Well, we've arrived. We're here at last. Another government shutdown averted. The government will remain open. I'm not sure if that's good news or bad news. People need to know, yes, the government will stay open and it will not be chaotic. Congress can adjourn, which is probably a good thing when Congress adjourns. But the thing about government staying open is we will pass something called a continued resolution. What does that mean? It means we're resolved to continue. Continue as we have for really decades. We will continue to spend money regardless of whether we have it or not. We will continue to spend money at a pace such that we will accumulate about $2 trillion in debt each year. The deficit will be about $2 trillion. Now, the spending is comprised of a lot of different areas. It's about $6.8 trillion in spending, and we bring in about $4.8 trillion in revenue. So it's about a $2 trillion mismatch. A lot of the spending is entitlements. Probably two-thirds of the spending is entitlements, but this body refuses to address entitlements. So as part of the continuing spending tonight, keeping government open, all of the entitlements will be taken off board, and there will be no reforms to entitlements, no reduction in spending in entitlements. They will continue growing somewhere between about 5 and 6% a year. Almost everybody on both sides of the aisle acknowledges that entitlements are the problem. Entitlements are driving the debt. What we vote on, people call a budget, or another word, they call it discretionary spending, is about $1.7 trillion or so, about $2 trillion. Of that $2 trillion, about half's military, half's not military. Well, the military has been taken off the table also, primarily by Republicans, but Democrats complicit as well. No military spending will be addressed, no waste in the military will be addressed, and the Pentagon will not be audited. They've said for decades the Pentagon needs to be audited, and the Pentagon says we're too big to be audited. Leave us alone, we are too big. Occasionally we'll find some things, $500 toilet seats or, $800 hammers, things like that. But overall, we have no idea where the money's going, and neither do they. They sometimes talk about hundreds of billions of dollars really literally missing, that they have no idea. But it's taken off the table because the powers that be say military is sacrosanct, cannot be looked at, and must have increased spending. So all the entitlements are going up. That's two-thirds of $6.8 trillion. The remaining $2 trillion is half military. It's going up, and nobody's looking at it either. So we have discretionary. Non-military discretionary spending is part of the budget also. And we couldn't come to an agreement, but other than we're going to be resolved to continue spending at about the pace we are. It'll be short term, and that would be bad enough because the spending will accumulate and is accumulating about a $2 trillion deficit. But that's not enough. This has been a horrendous week for fiscal conservatives because we are not going to just continue as we have been doing, continue loading on the debt. We are also adding to it in a dramatic fashion. This week, there'll be $330 billion added onto the spending. $200 billion of it will be for Social Security. And you say, well, we should want to help people. Why wouldn't we give people or senior citizens more money? Well, if we give new people more money, we have to take it from somewhere. We're going to have to either borrow it or we're going to have to print it. But it has to come from somewhere. Money doesn't grow on trees. So $200 billion increase in spending for Social Security. Where's the money going to come from? Now, I will offer an amendment that would pay for it. My amendment would be to raise the age gradually of Social Security. 3 months a year for about 12 years, and that would pay for the expansion of benefits. I think that's the only responsible way to do this. You want more benefits for people? You can't just, push the bankruptcy of Social Security and say, well, yeah, it'll go bankrupt in about 9 years, but maybe I won't be here, or maybe I won't be alive, and maybe it'll still exist for people. But shouldn't we care about what's going to happen to the future of Social Security? Shouldn't we care about how this is going to be paid for? But it'll be interesting to see how the vote is. I suspect I won't win, but we're going to have a vote on gradually raising the age. But here's the rub of how difficult it is and how far behind the 8 ball we've become. I proposed this solution 12 years ago, 13 years ago. When I did, it fixed 2/3 of the shortfall. If you raise the age gradually from 67 to 70, about 2 or 3 months a year, it wiped out most of the shortfall and fixed the problem 13 years ago. If you do it now, it only gives us 1 more year of solvency before bankruptcy comes. So we've taken a problem that was eminently fixable a decade ago, and at this point, if we were to do, and my amendment were to pass, it would pay for the expansion, but still the system is going bankrupt because we just keep adding stuff to it. Most people don't realize this, but Social Security actually will give you money no matter what your income is if you have teenage children and one of the parents is over 65. Now, somebody thought up this program and said, wow, this would be good. We should help out elderly parents that are taking care of teenagers. You can be a billionaire and file. I know people who are wealthy, whose kids drive Porsches, who are getting $1,500 a month for each of their kids because the dad is 65. Why would we do a program that's not based on income at all? Why would we let anybody join in that? Is that why Social Security is going bankrupt? No, that's just an element, though, of where the money's going. But everything that happens in the city is based on compassion. I feel for people and I want to help people. But nobody does anything based on math. Nobody really looks at this and says, well, shouldn't we do something to make sure it's paid for? What about next decade? What's going to happen to Social Security? Not a care. They just expand it, and it's feel good. You know, the free lunch, the mantra of free lunch is good. Here's stuff. Here's manna. Here, we're going to give you more money. Just be content. Take some Soma. Just relax. Here's some more money. But we're destroying the entitlement programs. Social Security is going bankrupt, and we sped up the bankruptcy this week by adding $200 billion. That is going to be concluded tonight. That's $200 billion in brand new spending to a system that was already $2 trillion short. Now, we also gave $30 billion to farmers. That's going to be in the package tonight, too. Now, why do the farmers say they need money? Many farmers are actually pretty well off and doing pretty well, actually. But they say that the tariffs during the first Trump administration hurt them so badly that they're still having reduced exports and they need more money. So we're still paying them for the tariff wars that were begun 4 years ago, and still half the people in the country are jumping up and down saying they want more tariffs. But what are we going to do? Pay off everybody that doesn't benefit from the tariffs? Think about it. If you put tariffs on a steel mill and you say, well, we're not going to let the Chinese sell any steel over here, you have this bright, shiny steel mill and all the 1,000 workers stand in front and they love you because you're going to help them with their jobs and they're going to be more secure. But for every person making steel, there's 80 workers working somewhere buying steel. So what you do is you just ignore the other half of the equation. Why? Because it's easy to see the shiny steel factory. It's easy to see those workers. The 80 workers that are working for other industries, car industry, building warehouses, anybody that uses steel, fences, all these people buying stuff are scattered through small industries and you don't see them. But their economic impact at least equals, but probably exceeds, the one you're trying to benefit. We do so many crazy things. So $200 billion to expand Social Security won't be paid for, speeds up the bankruptcy and demise of Social Security. $30 billion for farmers, many of whom have other resources and really are not desperately in need of this. What happens to the borrowing? $230 billion. Well, that's not over. We also are adding $100 billion for disaster. And you say to yourself, well, you know, we got to help people in need. They've had storms, they've had flooding. We got to help them. Well, shouldn't we try to root out the waste and fraud in those systems? The people who are stealing money from these things. If you want to know how people steal things and how many people are stealing things, when we did all that COVID stuff, we stopped the economy and we just gave free money to everybody. We actually had foreign scoundrels, foreign fraudsters come in and take tens of millions of dollars. But we also had U.S. citizens, buying Lamborghinis and Bugattis and all kinds of fancy cars on their government. We had people signing up for the program. One of them used an ID that had a picture of Barbie on it and got money. Many of them said, I have 500 workers, and they didn't have any workers. They didn't have a business. So just fraud was rampant throughout it. This happens also in the disaster relief programs as well. People claim things they lost in disasters that didn't exist. But let's put that aside, the waste and fraud in the program, and say, we got to help people. We got to do something about disasters. Well, maybe there ought to be a decision-making process where we say, what's more important, Ukraine or Asheville, North Carolina? Do we have enough money to do both? Well, we do if we borrow it, but when we borrow it, we add to the debt, the Fed buys the debt, and you create inflation. It's no mystery why your goods cost more. During the last 4 years, groceries, meat, poultry, gasoline, rent, everything's gone up on average at least 20%. Now, did it become more precious? Did we all of a sudden lose a supply of things? No, the dollar became weaker. The dollar became diluted because we had to buy all this debt. So it's a bait and switch. What we do is we expand, this week, $200 billion for Social Security, $100 billion for disasters, that's $300 billion, $30 billion for farm subsidies, $330 billion unpaid for. But the people here gathered, the vast majority of them that will vote for this will go home, pat themselves on the back and say, I brought you stuff. Isn't that what you want me to do? Bring you free stuff. Well, it's not free. It has ramifications. They're destroying the dollar. They're destroying the country. And yet it goes on. Because it seems to be easy just to promise people something for nothing. So I have a couple of different solutions. To pay for the Social Security, let's gradually raise the age. 3 months each year. And what it does is it actually pays entirely for this $200 billion expansion and then some. It has to be done. It will be done at some point. I offered it 13 years ago, and every year we've waited, we've gotten further behind the 8 ball, and every year we've waited, we've gotten to the point where it's much more difficult to dig out of this hole. As far as the shutdowns, I'll admit that it's chaotic to go through this every 3 months, every 6 months, every year. There could be a way that we could actually say when there is an impasse and both parties don't agree, we agree to continue spending, but not at the same level. See, the vote today on at least some of the budget, the part that's not going up like this, on a small portion, will continue at the same level. But realize 3/4 of it's going up. We're not keeping it steady. So if we vote to keep it steady, does that really fix the problem? No, if you keep it steady, and even if you didn't increase spending, the budget never balances. Why? Because you're only keeping a very small portion of the budget steady. It's really about 16%. 2/3, 66%, entitlements. The remaining third, half military, half non-military. Military is going up at 3%. Oh, that's right, I forgot. Republicans have a great plan. Come spring, the Republicans are by simple majority going to bust through the military caps. The military caps are put in place, like all other caps, to try to restrain spending, and they're ignored. But in the spring, the first reconciliation package that Republicans will pass with a simple majority is to bust through the military caps. Military doesn't have enough money. We spend more on our military than the next 8 countries combined, and yet it's never enough. People say we're going to find waste and fraud. I'm all for it. I'm a big supporter of looking for waste and fraud. I'm a big supporter of getting rid of it. Guess what? If you don't look at the entitlements, you're not a serious person. If you don't look at the military, you're not a serious person. The problem will go on. In the first Trump administration, $8 trillion were borrowed. I'm a fan of Donald Trump. I supported him. I voted for him. But we borrowed $8 trillion. During the Biden administration, coincidentally, we borrowed another $8 trillion. They were equally fiscally irresponsible. Now, at least during the Trump administration, you could argue it was, COVID and the pandemic and all that. But the reaction was too much, and the lockdowns were not necessary. They didn't save any lives through the lockdowns, and we spent a ton of money that we passed out for people not to work. But the bottom line is when you look at all of this, we have this enormous problem. I'm all for eliminating the waste and fraud. It's not enough. You have to look at the entitlements. You have to look at the military. Currently, we look at only about 16% of the budget. If you eliminated all of that, it's called non-military discretionary, it's part of the budget, you eliminate all of it, which isn't going to happen, the budget still never balances. You have to look at all the spending. We're not looking at any of the entitlement spending. In fact, it's worse. Entitlements are driving the debt, almost everybody agrees with it, and we're expanding the entitlements. Social Security, beginning in 2021, Social Security for the first time pays out more than it brings in taxes. It was the opposite for many years. Social Security brought in more than they spent, and they actually developed and had a reserve. For the last 3 years, Social Security has been paying out more than comes in. 2021, they paid out $50 billion more than came in. 2022, they paid out $22 billion more than came in. Last year, we paid out $40 billion more than we came in. If you had a business, or even if you had a social program, and you were paying out more than you brought in, wouldn't you try to reverse that trend? No, what we did this week is expand Social Security by $200 billion over 10 years. It's $20 billion a year. So if the debt next year for Social Security is going to be about the same as this year, it'd be $40 billion. We added $20 billion to that. What's the math? A 50% increase in our debt. So for someone who's fiscally conservative, this isn't a very good Christmas. This is a Christmas of just doing the same old thing. So when you hear CR or continuing resolution, realize your government is resolved just to continue doing the same thing. They're kicking the can down the road. The debt's going to continue to accumulate, and they're not doing anything to fix it. So don't be pleased with your people. Look closely. Who are my representatives, and are they doing the right thing? So we're going to offer a pay-for the Social Security. That will be one of my amendments tonight. We're also going to offer something called the Government Shutdown Protection Act. And what it will do is it says when there is an impasse, when Republicans and Democrats don't agree, that the spending would continue at a reduced level. The level we chose was enough to try to bring both sides together to actually form an agreement, but also we chose a number that would be enough of a cut to actually put us on a path to balance. So if my amendment were to pass, government wouldn't shut down from here on out, but the spending would be at a 6% reduced level. This actually balances the budget, and it's a pretty significant cut. Most of them will say, oh, it's too much, we can't vote for it. But the thing is even if my cuts were to go into place, even if my amendment were to pass, a 6% cut, it would take 5 years to get to balance in 1 year. Not to get rid of any debt that we've accumulated, but just to get to an annual balance. And they are like, oh, woe is me. We could never do it. We can't cut people. People deserve money. People deserve stuff. We have to give them more stuff. Do you know that the European Union, 16 out of 28 countries in the European Union, who many of them are considered to be socialist, actually balance their budget? I met with a socialist from Sweden. He was more conservative than everybody across the aisle. He was more conservative than half the Republicans up here because they thought that actual entitlements should be based on the economy. Their entitlements actually go down when the economy goes down. If the economy shrinks, their entitlements shrink. Just everybody knows it's going to happen. It's a bad year, you're going to get a little bit less. People would go nuts here. We do the opposite. So during the last 4 years, they created so much inflation that people's costs went up 20%. What do? We have to give cost of living adjustments to those on Social Security, and we did. But we were short even more money, and it made the problem even worse and sped up the bankruptcy of Social Security. So my amendment would say we actually have to reduce spending. Now, some people say to conservatives, both in my party and the others, they say, oh, you people are unrealistic. You'll never vote to raise the debt ceiling. But even if I had my way, and we got cuts significant enough that I think the American people would accept, but most of this body wouldn't, and we balanced the budget in 5 years, we would still accumulate debt over those 5 years. And I would vote to raise the debt ceiling during that brief period of time as we are on the way towards balancing our budget. But none of that's going to happen. what we are doing this week and what both parties will be complicit in, and I mean both parties. Every Democrat here will vote for this bill, I assume. Every Democrat will vote to continue to be resolved to spend money at a rate that is $2 trillion more than comes in. But half the Republicans will join them. There'll be a minority of Republicans who will say, we're conservative and we shouldn't spend this much money. But we will offer amendments tonight, and people will get to decide where they are. And people at home will have to decide, are we going to live this way? How long can we live this way? What causes inflation? Can we not have representatives who believe that balancing our budget is the appropriate thing to do? So the amendments I offer today are such that I think they're necessary. I think they'll help us to save Social Security from bankruptcy, but they won't be very popular here. But I offer them in hopes that people will see them across America and say, at least somebody cares about the solvency of Social Security. At least somebody has the guts to say, this is what we would do to try to save and preserve Social Security, rather than just giving free stuff to everybody and saying, no big deal, you can have more. What? You want more? Here's more. Somebody's got to ask how we're going to pay for this. Someone's got to be responsible up here. And if you watch closely who votes on this amendment, you'll see who are the truly fiscally responsible people in the Senate. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield back my time.